I guess that's enough of that, pop fans. I mean, clearly it sets the tone for our high quality interviews that we run regularly on a Saturday morning. And today, very, very fortunate to have the lovely Becki Bawler with us. Dr. Rebecca Bawler, I should say, to use the official title. Lovely to have you here. Brief introduction. We certainly don't stand on formalities, but for those who've not encountered Becki on your travels, Becki's a Cardiff-based educator and school leader, lead teacher for ICT and digital, a former professional advisor to the Welsh Government, a long-standing voice in EdTech, a TES star of the sector, prolific blogger, a particular focus on Wales's HWB platform, the Successful Futures curriculum, and closing the digital divide. Amen to that. Her doctorate in education at Cardiff sits right at the intersection of digital competency and curriculum reform, and her Estonia trip taps into what's widely regarded as Europe's standout education system. Oh, we've had some conversations around Estonia on this.
Yeah.
Top of the PISA tables and a world leader in digital education. I hope I've encapsulated some of the bits, but it's always tough when we get a summary. Becki, it's lovely to have you here. Can we kick off with a slightly easy one that you'll know? For people that don't know your work, what was the question at the heart of your thesis and what pulled you toward it?
Yeah. So I've been teaching for a very long time. And for me, the digital competence framework in Wales was all about the learners. And I really found there was a massive gap with actually what about the staff and what about the schools? And so when I started in 2017, it was all about digital skills and upskilling staff. And then obviously we had the joy of COVID and everybody suddenly learned how to use Teams. But I kind of was just about to start my research phase then. I was like, yeah, but we still don't really get digital. And so my real crux of my thesis was, what do we need in schools to become digitally competent as a learning organisation? So not about the teaching of digital in the classroom. We're getting pretty good at teaching e-safety to kids now. We are, as a profession, we're all pretty good at it. But actually, what does staff need? What do schools need? After COVID, particularly, healthcare systems transitioned, not seamlessly, but they transitioned to lots of online systems, lots of digitising. Professional sectors moved digitally as well. And we kind of stuck in that Victorian, no, teachers have to be at the front of the class. Therefore, there wasn't that massive sort of impetus on what a school looks like that's digitally competent.
Just slide back, wasn't there, Becki? A kind of a sense of, well, we did it, not the best version of providing that kind of blend of digital and, synchronous and asynchronous learning, but there was almost a, thank goodness that's over. Let's slide back to what we're most comfortable with. I mean, there's an element of pressure and capacity that was the reason for that too, though, wasn't there?
There definitely was. And I think, the big focus, certainly in my school and schools that I know, when our learners came back in, it was about their safety. It was about their social skills. It was definitely about their literacy. But without literacy, there is no curriculum. That has to be the front and center, the social skills, getting them to feel safe again, getting them to learn to be in that environment of 30 young people all with their own needs. So there was that kind of actually, we can push digital back to the side now in the classroom. But actually now thinking about, where my thesis ended up was looking at 2 primary schools that I would consider to be digitally leading and how they've kind of adopted the digital culture and a digital mindset really, and how digital permeates everything they do as a staff and as a school, not just about what they teach to the learners. So it was a really interesting piece of research looking at the policy landscape in Wales and how the influence is always on the teaching of digital and the reality of actually moving us as a sector into the 21st century, where we're actually using the digital tools more effectively and what we need to do that.
How much do you think we're there, Becki? And if you go back to 2017 and how many schools were using digital tools effectively or at all compared to now, what's the difference?
I don't think there's a very big difference in a lot of schools. I think that whilst we were sort of 2017, 18, there was that shift. There was a big impetus, certainly in Wales with the Hub platform. We had our agreements with Microsoft. We had agreements with Google. Every child in Wales has access to those tools automatically just by being a pupil in Wales. So there was that kind of influence of it. Then obviously we had emergency remote learning, which was not hybrid in any true sense of the word. And then we came back and it all sort of, didn't fall apart, but we had other priorities. And I actually think schools now are back to a point where, recruitment and retention is massive. And part of that reason, probably, if we really looked at it, is the flexibility of other professions and the digitization of other professions that we just don't get. Looking at these two schools and how they've adopted digital to make their lives better and more efficient and more effective was really, really interesting.
Becki, I really like the theme here because we often like to unpick those awkward questions. And when I look in my maps at the moment, I would say when we look at our risk register, the things that really challenge us at the strategic level, recruitment retention is really high on there. And then we've got everything from attendance to curriculum and engagement for learners. We've got our SEMH. Yes, we're worried about cybersecurity and, racking our buildings and all the other things that might go on that list. But actually, digital almost weaves in the, well, let's not necessarily start with digital and curriculum. What about digital and staff workload, and how does that feed into a measure of retention? The challenge has always been the technology's there. That's perhaps unfair to say many have figured out that technology in the right hands with the right why can be purposeful, and in the wrong hands with no intent can be damaging. So there's this kind of disconnect, which is we haven't figured out how to create the time and space to deliver the level of professional confidence for staff. But it's an uncomfortable thing to say the problem with tech is the staff don't know how to use it. That sounds like a really derogatory thing, whereas for us it's saying, but we've got a system that intentionally creates no space for professional development time. We just keep layering on other things. And then we've also got ECTs that really don't have technology as part of that training cycle either. I mean, are those kind of strands that you're identifying as part of that research?
Yeah. So I interviewed 4 professionals in Wales who are integral, and they are well-known people who have been involved in lots of policy making at quite a high level in Welsh government. They're also, a couple of them are practicing teachers as well and head teachers. And then these 2 cases. And what the research came up with was this idea that actually leadership, funnily enough, is the linchpin. It's the middle of everything. And actually that the culture of leadership is what drives everything in a school, which to those of us in a school seems like, well, yeah, obviously. But it's about the leaders of the school saying, I'm not a digital expert. So where are my experts in the staff? Where do I leave that confidently to? Who do I give that to? Who do I say, I am confident with this person taking over this bit, and I will listen to them and I will hear their recommendations and I will go with it. And also that leader then making space for the professional learning, because the second strand then is that professional learning. One of the big things that I found was it's not about professional learning, inset days, going to a course. It's the informal community of practice style approach, where I think the Americans, that water cooler training, it's the informal conversations. And what both of my schools said was they value those more, and they value the culture that their leader has given them to allow them to go, I don't know how to do X. Can you help me?
I really like that. One of the things, Becki, that I try and share, and I know Matt and I talk about, but I've more about identifying the flag bearers. Actually, if you just know who the go-to people are for different tools or approaches, and then have those watercolor moments or those bits where you can pick a non-judgmental, hey, give us a hand, what do you think? And then that seems to be better than the, right, let's create the structured, you're going to have 4 hours here and 4 hours there of inset and try and remember it. There's an interesting one, Matt, on that we also have, which is, before we head off down the whole Estonia, another path on it is there seems to be a disconnect to all of the best practice in terms of pedagogy, in terms of teaching young people anything, and the way that we then adopt professional development for our staff. And the disconnect between the two seems to always kind of strike me with why would we assume that, a day at the start of the academic year is all you need to remember and develop yourself by the time you get to the end? It kind of feels like, are we ever just stopping and pausing and reflecting for a second? What do you think?
Yeah. These schools, what they did was they had their digital lead, and in one school it was a member of staff who, while I was there, was doing his teacher training. He'd been a teaching assistant, and he'd been their digital lead as a teaching assistant, and he was doing the I think it's the GTP route or the Open University or the paid route. And he was doing his teacher training in the school as the digital lead, having already been the digital lead as a TA. And the other school was a teacher who'd been very experienced. But both of them provided regular sessions throughout all staff meetings. Every time there was a staff meeting, there was a digital agenda item. And it might be 5 minutes, it might be an hour. Every professional learning day, there was an element of digital. There was a newsletter that came out. They both had their regular weekly newsletters, bulletins. That always had a digital element on it. There was always a drop-in session. There was that recognition that all staff had value in something, in some area. There was one lady I interviewed, and she'd been in the school. She was a teaching assistant. She'd been there for 30 odd years. She said, I know nothing about technology, but I'm the one they always come to when they need something plugging back in, or they need to know where the remotes are, so actually she did know, and she was their go-to for those things. And I think that leader in both of those schools recognized those things and built that real trust and real community. So it wasn't just, it's the 1st of September. Here's your 1 hour on digital awareness today, and we're all going to learn how to use this tool. Because that's not how it works.
Can I ask how big the schools were, Becki? Because I find two things recently. One is reading about other things, whether it's on the newsletter about nature and things, that people at the top just facilitate, often with time and funding for the people on the ground to do it. So it's bottom up as opposed to top down, which seems to be more effective. And the other thing is, I always think the size of the school is a challenge as well, because if you're a school that's my size, you've got Peter Rafferty, you've got exactly what you two are talking about. We've got the constant water cooler guys always available. But if you're a school with 500 kids or 600 kids and 200 staff, or a secondary with, 2,000 kids and a few hundred staff, that inset day, that one inset day becomes even less pointless.
Yeah.
So are those two schools you're talking about small schools, medium schools, or what?
Yeah, they were both in the same local authority. Because obviously every school in Wales is still local authority. We don't have any trusts or anything. So they were both the same local authority. And one was around about 250 students with a free school meals of around 55%. So very, very deprived. The other one was probably, as the crow flies, 11 miles away. And that had a free school meals of about 12%. But again, it was around the 300 mark. So for us, it was sort of 1 to 2 form entry, which is about average for most schools in Wales. Like in cities, you get 3 form entries, but then there's a lot more. But it's about sort of the average. There are much bigger primary schools. One of the things that, in the thesis, you have to kind of do your end section of, where would you take this next? And I think actually for me, the next step would be, how does that look in those schools, cluster, sort of the rest of the cluster? What about in their secondary school? Because they both fed into the same secondary school. So is there that digital awareness, that sort of digital mindset that then permeates further out? Or is it purely down to the strength of those leaders in those schools?
Can I ask about Eston? Because obviously Ofsted, we've got Vic Headland doing stuff on Ofsted. But Ofsted don't really look at digital. You'll find it very rarely recognised or mentioned in historical reports over the last framework. Is Eston holding schools accountable in any way?
Well, so interestingly, we've obviously got new Eston frameworks. They seem to change regularly. I like the new framework that we've got. It's a narrative judgment. There's no actual grades or boundaries or anything like that. No single word judgments for anything. It's all narrative. However, when you look at the reports, what you find is literacy is 2 paragraphs, numeracy is 1, digital is usually half a paragraph.
Yeah.
It is starting to change because the last few that have come out, they've got a massive focus on skills, and they are starting to increase digital. And the 2 of the Eston inspectorate team were with us in the Estonia trip. They had actually worked with the British Council and Welsh Government to kind of facilitate the trip, because they've got a real interest in digital and AI that is now growing. So I think things are starting to move a little in that direction. But I think the focus will always be literacy first, then numeracy, and then digital at the end. But it is starting to shift a little bit.
It's not unreasonable in a sense. I mean, we want the literacy and numeracy to be at the heart of everything. I think Matt's point is if you put a clear message out that we want all skills to be looking to use technology, and particularly in terms of English government, using AI, and you need to be able to evidence where it's used and where there's risk of cognitive offloading and yada, yada, yada. You'd like to think that in an inspection process, they might actually ask you a few questions about that and actually hold that element to challenge.
Yeah. But it is, isn't it? If you're being looked at for it, you'll do it. It's just what we do in schools. If we know someone's going to come around with a clipboard and look for certain things, we make sure those things are being done to the best of our ability.
We might sometimes not necessarily agree with why we're doing that, and there might be better things we could do with our time, but I think we can all be diplomatic on that middle ground. So, yes. Moving on, while Matt just sucks a strepsil or something else and gets himself into action. We talked about Estonia, which often gets held up as a success story. I often think people forget there's a journey and a history there, and a separation from a former Soviet Union and a chance to redefine their curriculum. But nonetheless, they definitely have a different way of thinking, and they can do things in a small country at scale. What did you go looking for there? And did it match what their reputation, for want of a better term?
Yeah, so we went on, it was an organised study tour to look at their use of AI, particularly in the classroom. And we went there in February, and first thing we all kind of noticed once we got over the cold, because it was really, really cold, the first thing we all noticed was actually they'd only just put the technology in the hands of the learners about 2 weeks before we arrived. They'd spent 12 months, and this for me was the fun. 12 months training the staff. And we met with lots of people. We met with people from the education department. We met with people from the government. We went and visited 4 very different schools who had very different perspectives on the use of technology as well, which was really interesting. We all of us who were teachers came away from it going, actually, do you know what? We're not far behind in Wales. You know, we have a national platform. We have access to these tools. We just need to push the agenda in the way that we want it. You know, we just need to kind of go, actually, look at the risk of AI, but look what Estonia have done. You know, it's smaller than Wales population wise. So, you know, look at how they have managed it. And there is that impetus now to try and do something about it. But I think what really came through from me in the Estonia visit was they take their time in planning something. It's not just, we're going to do this, here you go, off you go. That 12-month lead up, you know, we fully went in expecting to see AI in every classroom and the kids using it and everything. And we didn't see that. You know, we saw laptop trolleys in corridors. We didn't see one-to-one devices. We saw really careful, planned pedagogy, planned use of technology. We saw conversations about the use of technology and AI. We didn't see a device in every hand.
You say AI, Becki. I think they signed a deal with ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So when we talk AI, are they restricted to using that?
It's a new Socratic-based chatbot, though, isn't it? They've kind of done quite a lot of development around. Sorry, you probably know. Well, you will know more than me, but there's quite a lot of stuff shared recently, both about that kind of training program, but the fact that rather than just putting a large language model, they wanted specifically a tool that would encourage the child to think more about the topic rather than just give them the cognitive offload and give them an answer. But that's probably, when you were there in February, would be, like you say, the very early stage of students having access to that.
And that's what we were kind of being shown and talked about. And certainly when we talked to the digital leads in the school, which the educational technologists, as they called them, which I loved as a job title, that idea of, you know, it was an open source model that had been specifically developed for them that would be asking questions, not just giving an answer. It would be prompting the students to think, not just go, what is this? It would be, well, what do you need it for? What subject? What content? What else do you need? And there was those constant prompts being drawn in before anything would really be resolved. And then there was a big impetus on the student doing the resolution, still not the language model going, here you go, here's your answer. So they were using it really, really thoughtfully. And they used the framework called the ICAP framework. And that basically influenced their entire pedagogy. They looked at how they are using their technology, how they are using it, to make not just passive learners, but active learners in the process. So that whole reciprocal nature of this large language model. They looked at higher order thinking skills. Where does that fit in? Are we actually teaching our learners critical thinking? And one of the schools, they gave us a wonderful example of how in an English piece of work, that they used various different pieces of AI, of generative AI, and various different pieces of other AI sources to actually get to the end result. So, they started off with things like using Grammarly, put your draft in and get, red flag all your errors. Now identify those errors and redraft it. Now put it into this tool and do this with it. Now put it into this tool and do this with it. So it wasn't a case of, here you go, put it into ChatGPT and get it to write it for you. So the whole thing around it, they'd taken such a long time to train their staff in how to use it effectively, that actually when it went into the classroom, and like we said, we would love to go back in 6 months and see what it's looking like. But when
So
it went
flexibility there, Becki, to allow staff to decide when that was an appropriate tool to use rather than being a prescriptive tool.
Yeah, definitely. It was very much pedagogy-first approach. Is it the right tool for the job right now? And that was so important. I think that's how they'd kind of developed their whole use of technology over the years as well. From the Tiger Leap program early on, it was very much, is it the right tool for the job right now? Or is there something else we can use that is better and more effective?
That communication from the top bit kind of comes on that, because I think we constantly have this, can't believe the country's going to AI for all their learners. When the caveat is, well, potentially for an hour or two a week where it's appropriate and it helps develop their thinking in a different way. But the signposting is suddenly this child's going to have a friendly bot to talk to 8 hours a day. And it really kind of misleads in terms of the thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does.
Mr.
Just going to ask, in terms of that year, what did that year look like in terms of training?
So it was a lot of filtering, down. So they said that they had all school had a nominated education technologist who was not always the IT teacher. They came from a breadth of different areas, both in primary and secondary. They all had regular sort of regional meetings, so monthly meetings, and that they were given the information from their central point. Their education department would come down. They would give the same message then to each sort of region. They would have the same information. They would then have planning time. They would have preparation time. They would then take that to their schools. They would then disseminate that in their schools. And it was very much a slow and steady progress where it was the same person going to the regional meeting every month, and that person then would train out their staff. And it was really interesting to see how that had kind of changed the dynamic of it a bit, because they knew that once a month they would be having these sessions and they would be learning something.
Quite evolutionary rather revolutionary. The perception is always that they're massively innovating, and then when you drill down, it's actually they're taking quite measured steps. Ironically, the way to move quickly isn't to deploy something quick, it's to put those foundations in to skill up your staff, and then you'll probably go quicker at the end. Was there anything you discovered that changed your thinking, or something that surprised you as part of that research and seeing what was going on in Estonia?
I think for me, it was that real influence of pedagogy first. And it was that, it is not the be all and end all, because like you said, Estonia is always held up as like that great technical country. And, we went there and they said that they are where they are because of necessity. They have no natural resources. They had obviously a very turbulent political time. They had to do something. So they chose digital. And, they've digitized all their services. But in terms of education, it is a very, very much pedagogy first. They have no formal performance management, which really surprised me. It's not a national prescription that there's performance management, but better schools have performance management. There's only just started to have scale of teachers, and you have to demonstrate your worth, if you like, to get onto the next level of teaching. So you have standard teachers, then you have master teachers, and then you have another category. And depending on how much influence you're having further from your school will depend on whether you can go up to the next sort of teaching rung of the ladder. So everybody is the same. So actually being a teacher is being a teacher. It's important. And I think that constant recognition of it's about your classroom. It's about pedagogy first. It's about what you are doing day in, day out makes a big difference, because I think we get caught up here with all the other things we have to do.
It's funny how the world comes full circle. We used to have ASTs, advanced skill teachers, and then that kind of phased out. And there seems to be a lot of effort and time putting together evidence, jumping from main pay scale to upper pay scale. And you do sometimes wonder and think, whilst we want to make sure that people's professional experience and qualifications are respected and regarded, whether we get too carried away with structures and frameworks and measuring to allow people just to get on and do the thing that they're most committed to do. It's easy to say, and I appreciate as a government, you've got to have some measures, both at system level and school level and performance management, but a bit of nuance does feel like it would benefit the system significantly.
Yeah. I think the other great thing was watching a primary school go out skiing for their morning break. They all went out, got their cross-country skis on, and off they went. And I was like, oh, I love this.
All they needed was an alpaca and it would have been a perfect suit. Yeah.
I was going to ask, what's the big thing from your trip? When you mentioned performance management, that genuinely surprised you, but also that changed your own assumptions about Estonia, maybe?
Yeah, for me, I think it was that we in Wales are on the same pathway. We are actually, we get that perception that we are miles behind, both, England and Wales, and Estonia are miles up there. But actually, we have a lot of the same things ready to go. And I think that really surprised me, because I kind of went there and we were all sat around one evening and we were like, actually, we've got this and we've got that. And, we've got certain tools and technologies now coming into our schools. And once the risk has been sort of ironed out a little bit, we are having conversations about when do we put these in the hands of the learners. So other than the fact that they took that 12 months and really, really worked on their professional learning, which we are missing here.
Yeah.
As a country, I think Wales particularly are in a really good position to kind of go, do you know what? We're not far behind. We're really not that far behind. We just need to emphasize that planning time a little bit more.
It feels like Wales has the systems in place better than England, but also that Wales has less complications in terms of cascading it down, because you've got your government, you've got your hub and everything, you've got your 6 local authorities or whatever it is, or 6 areas. And then you come to England and you've got governments, local authorities, MATs, dioceses, plus it's an absolute fractured mess in a way.
Yeah, well, we've got about 1,500 schools.
Yeah, so a lot less schools.
The majority of which are local authority. We have got some religious schools, we have got some diocese schools, but they all still have access to hub. We've got a very small handful of independent schools. We have no multi-academy trusts. So everything does come from government down to the local authority level. We've got school improvements sort of around there as well. But they're now linked more directly to local authority level. And then there is no other influence. There's no private sector influence. There's no sort of, multi-academy trusts sort of wanting to go in a certain direction. So it does feel like, we've got the infrastructure as well with the hub platform. It's really well established. It's not mandatory. Schools don't have to have it, but, most schools use it at least some of the time. So we've got all those things there.
I just remember visiting, I think it was Cornish Park 10 years ago now, and speaking to staff about the digital competency framework and seeing it in action and thinking, wow, Wales is so well organised here in many respects. And it's been used correctly as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, it's all under review as well. The digital competence framework and things. Yeah. There's a recognition that it's old now. So the review is starting. So it's kind of like, actually, we know that these things have to move and have to develop. But I think for me, coming back to the research that I did, if we don't get that professional learning right, then actually we're doing ourselves as teachers, as a profession, a disservice. We really are, because we're great for the kids. But actually, are we going to retain our teachers if they can go down the road and work flexibly instead?
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of consideration in the bigger picture. I mean, I take your points. Folks will know that, I chair a MAT, I work on a number of MATs and have a DFE role supporting multi-academy trusts. It doesn't mean that I'm actually a massive fan in all cases, because I think there's, like most systems, there's good and there's bad applications and values and everything that goes with it. But you do consistently see the challenge that because there are so many different layers within the English education system, it's much harder to distill that best practice down in a consistent way that you referred to, Becki. And then there's been other conversations recently about the whole recruitment and retention, that we have graduates leaving university and they've got 4 or 5 different pathways. And one is, going into finance or research or whatever the topic might be. And potentially they can work from home 3 days a week, have that flexibility. And education says, no, we want you here. And it's very restrictive. And at the same time, we see an awareness and quite a rapid growth in the delivery of online and hybrid education. And we can all take our view based on age and stage of what that might look like and what that offers. But with 25% of English children not in a mainstream setting, there is a sense of that unlocks the potential for making teaching in different settings more attractive, more appealing, and maybe there is a need to have that kind of nuance. I mean, is that something in the Welsh system that there's a recognition of how do we get some of our learners into the traditional bricks and mortar space?
Yeah, I think certainly when I was doing my work in as professional advisor, the emphasis is still around, we want learners in schools, but there's also recognition that these schools have to be the right places for these learners, and they're not always. We've got an organisation here called Escol. They were originally set up to support Welsh language teaching. So in some of our rural schools where a learner might want to learn geography through the medium of Welsh, but at A level, and they didn't have a Welsh-speaking geography teacher, they would do hybrid learning for that. And Escol have certainly developed over the last few years. They are primarily around Welsh language, but they're about those sort of opportunities to start introducing some of the sort of the e-learning opportunities, hybrid learning, learners in schools with a specialist teacher who speaks the language on the other side of a screen. So there is some development around that. There's a recognition that we need that, particularly in Welsh. And I think it's starting to shift a little bit. I think the difficulty then with that is sort of the other main factor is that infrastructure. And do we have the infrastructure to hold up across a school to allow for these sort of things to happen? One of the things that came out of my thesis was that idea of the teachers going and planning a online sort of lesson or a digital lesson, and then the network crashes. And it's not constant enough to allow that to be the norm. And even these digitally competent schools were worried about it. So if we're going to start looking at hybrid and different models like that, we need to make sure that we've got the infrastructure behind us to really support it. You wouldn't want to be going to your hospital and your network to be failing on a regular basis, but it's okay for that to happen in schools.
And my GP surgery, actually, but that's a whole different story. But you're right. I mean, it's the same conversation about shouldn't we be moving to digital exams? And we can talk about the pros and cons, but the practical answer is how are you going to deliver that technology equitably at scale to ensure that every learner can? We had a lot of support, with technology during the pandemic being rolled out to schools to help mitigate some of those challenges for our learners that didn't have access to technology. 5 years on, we're in a refresh cycle and there's no capital funding for any new kit. So we're almost stepping backwards in terms of the amount of IT in the estate.
When you say technology rolled out, wow, during the COVID, we got
boxed up and posted, to be fair, but
we got 2 devices, it was like, Not really.
So we've got a
wrong.
much better deal here. We got a really good deal in Wales, and we've got sustainability funding now as well. So I've got a refresh pot.
Okay, now that I'm starting to get a little bit green at this point, so you've actually got a plan where those devices are going to get maintained and sustained?
Yeah. So we have EdTech funding every year. I don't know, we've had this year, so it's rolled out every year. We get an amount based on our PLAS data for how many students we've got, comes through a local authority, list of devices we can buy. I will be very honest, I was very, very frightened when I saw the prices of Windows devices this year and realised that Macs were actually cheaper than Windows this year.
Bonkers, isn't it?
But we get this agreed pricing, central pricing for volume purchasing. We then have a sustainability fund. So whatever we buy, we have to put so much back a year. And it has to go to the central sustainability pot. And then each year I'm told how much I've got in my sustainability pot as well. And that is my refresh. So I make sure, so I've got Chromebooks in my school and we're on our second refresh now. And it's all, we have to keep putting back in, but you put back in over 5 years what you take out in a year. So, we have EdTech standards. All 22 local authorities meet regularly to make sure we have the same standards. There's still variation. There definitely is still variation. And the same as the EdTech funding, there's room for improvement in what's offered. But we do have, and it stand out here. It's really good. I can go and say, I want to spend this. It's in my sustainability pot.
Maybe we'll bring one of our school minibuses to the Menai Strait and just ask for a handover of your used kit so we can top up.
Yeah.
Please, may I?
Can I just ask Becki, in terms of education, I can never understand why it's not a priority for government, politicians and voters, I suppose, to an extent. Because to me, it's like the bedrock of all industry sectors, whatever it's manufacturing, whatever it is. When Wales, to what extent does Wales work with industry when it reviews curriculums and frameworks? And what did you see in Estonia as well?
So in terms of Wales, they do work really well with regional development, business development areas, particularly, you've got the South Wales corridor along the M4 where there's a huge volume of industry, lots of semiconductor businesses and things. And then you've got the North Wales Airbus industry. There's a huge influence that they have goes both ways. They get involved when we did our new curriculum. They were part of the discussion. Certainly when I did I was on the group that wrote the digital technology GCSE, the first iteration of it. There was influence from industry there, from higher education. What are the skills that these young people need? So there is a real two-way conversation when we're looking at qualifications and curriculum. There's always room for more. Absolutely. And I think, education kind of stops, doesn't it? Once we've got a curriculum, we don't want to change it every single year, depending on what the business wants. But equally, we do have that sort of influence. And I think what I noticed in Estonia was that private sector were involved as well in some ways. So they didn't have quite as many national platforms like we have, with our registrations systems and, management information systems. There were one or two in Estonia, and private companies would say, I've got this product. Does it meet the criteria to go on? They had a website and they would go onto the website and schools would be allowed to purchase from it, knowing that it was safe, knowing that it was trusted. So there was that sort of working with industry in that way. And their unicorn squad for girls in STEM was a really big thing. That had all been started at sort of ground level. So there is that partnership, and I think we've got it in Wales. I think we can still improve it. And certainly Estonia have got the same thing, where we are looking at what is needed. And I think once we've got the fundamentals of literacy right across everywhere, and that influence of what is needed next is really important. Like he's mentioned, the exams, I've still got massive concerns about digital exams, logistically. But I think the new qualifications in Wales that are coming through, we are starting to see more of a vocational route as well.
Brilliant.
We've got new VGCSEs coming online in 27, 28, I think. That next wave of qualifications, which are so important. It's not all about getting 10 A stars anymore.
No.
And just from what you know, what interest is there from the English Department for Education in seeing what Wales is doing?
From my personal view, I think they both kind of go, no, we're doing this because you're not, and you're doing this, so we won't. Whether that will change now we've got new government, I don't know. It certainly sounds a bit more positive, but I don't know. I think there's kind of like that hinge point. I kind of always imagine Wales is like hinged onto the end of England. And sometimes that hinge is really, really strong because we have to keep the GCSE brand because it matches England, and we have to keep the same term dates because of England. And then sometimes it's like the hinge is a bit rusty and we can kind of start pulling it apart a little bit.
There's some regional, and dare I say at times, departmental snobbery that happens. I think to recent events with OECD looking at bringing together high-performing regions as part of research work. England was very keen to be part of that conversation and be leading and presenting. And yet the data said you should be sat in the room with a pen and paper taking notes, not the ones leading the conversation. And there's just a reminder sometimes, I think most people who take their time and effort looking at the landscape within the United Kingdom would say that England can look in all directions and actually learn when it comes to joined up unified approaches, whether it's Scotland and unified data sharing and how they manage their systems, to what's happening from a Welsh perspective. But it is interesting that, we have all these challenges, and yet at the very heart of education, we still struggle with the idea of looking outside, as if somehow if I have to look elsewhere, that's a critique of me, rather than it's education. Remember, lifelong learners, constantly curious. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, and the world is such that our learners could go and teach, work anywhere.
Absolutely,
especially with the network systems as they are. You could sit in your front room and be actually working for a company thousands of miles away.
Becki, it's been a pleasure. I'm very conscious of the stopwatch and a download before our next guest joins us. Thanks for making time out on a Saturday to share your work and experiences. It's really refreshing to hear a perspective, and like all these conversations, no matter what we talk about, technology or politics or anything else, it all comes back to pedagogy and a teacher in the heart of the discussion, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's really appreciated.
Thanks. Bye-bye.